Good evening. All right, so we have one here at least. I hear some buzz, but all right, let's try that one more time. Good evening. All right, now I know you're there. Any of you guys had a tough day today? All right, the rest of you, we're cruising. We're cruising. We're going to learn some good stuff again. So welcome to the Morristown Adventist Church. I have a little quick survey before I introduce the speakers. How many of you came to this seminar here because of previous seminars that you've come to? Okay. All right. How many of you heard about this through flyers? Okay. All right. Any of you see it in the paper? One person in the two. Okay, a couple of people saw it in the paper, and it was supposed to be on the radio too. Okay, so it helps me to know as so we have future programs. Some of you are on our email list, and I know that some of you are on the email list and don't get the emails, which to me means that it's going into spam. So the email address that we use to send out information is New Start of Morristown at gmail.com. Okay. So for future events, if you can check your spam folder and identify that as a safe email address, you should be getting our other announcements. That's just a whole lot easier to do email than a phone call. Okay. So actually, I'll have Lorena, my wife, at the exit with a sheet of paper. If you're not on our email list or you're not getting emails, put your email address in a legible fashion, please. And when you see New Start of Morristown next time, you can say that's a safe email. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, so this is the Gut-Brain Connection series. And if you've looked there on the outside, there is a Gut-Brain Connection video series. What you're hearing this week is a fraction of what's on that DVD series. Literally a fraction. So if you want more of this, make sure to get your hands on that DVD series. And Chad and Fadia will have more to share on that. But once again, I am happy here to have Chad and Fadia join us this week. I've been learning stuff. What did you learn Tuesday night? Or I should say, what did you do different, hopefully, from stuff that you learned Tuesday night? That was Monday night. Monday night was Chew, okay? You learned that again. You heard that again on Tuesday night. Okay, good. What did you learn on Tuesday night that you did different? Drink more water? Open the windows. Oh, you know how long my wife has been trying to have me do that. I had to pull an extra blanket out Tuesday night. Literally. It's like at 3 in the morning, it's like, she cracked the window a little too much. What else did you learn? Rumination thoughts. Okay, good. All right, so you're processing. I want you to not just be listening, but putting into practice. All right, so with that, let's bow our heads for prayer, and we'll pass on the mic. Heavenly Father, okay, it's great here to be learning. But more than learning, we want to have transformed lives by the help of your Holy Spirit. So as we learn some more tonight, we ask that you empower us and that we not just be hearers, but doers as well. Put your words in the mouth of Chad and Fadia Kreuzer as they share tonight, and we ask this in Jesus' name, amen.
Good evening. Welcome back. Tonight we're going to talk directly more in detail on the gut-brain connection to depression and happiness. We're going to start off looking at the oldest study in recorded history. Medical historians have sought out trying to find the oldest scientific study in all of recorded history, and this is what they have come to. This is from Perspectives in Clinical Research, and it says that in 562 BC, the world's first clinical trial is recorded in the book of Daniel in the Bible. That's interesting, isn't it? The very first study that medical historians have been able to find is in the book of Daniel in the Bible. Fascinating. And what is that study about? It's in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel and his, they become his friends, but at least if they weren't back in Jerusalem, Daniel's taken captive from his hometown of Jerusalem, taken back to Babylon, put through a 3-year educational system, and there they were given by the king the best food in Babylon, and the best food to the king was the best meat that you could eat. I mean, that's obviously what most cultures would imagine would be the very best thing. And then it says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not, what? Defile himself. So Daniel and his friends say, yeah, we're not so sure. Actually, Daniel was the one who said it. We're not so sure we want to do this. And so Daniel proposed that they do a study, the first study in all of recorded history. And it's in verse 12 where it says, test your servants for 10 days and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Now, pulse are things that are grown from seeds. So Daniel and his friends go on a plant-based diet, and what ends up happening is it impacts their cognition. In verse 20, it says, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them after this was all done, he found them, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or we also know of them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He found them 10 times better than all the other magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. So what Daniel and his friends did by going on this diet, it evidently impacted their cognition. Now, it's interesting because we've done some experiments like this in modern times, and I'm going to show you just a clip from a documentary that my wife and I made called Ancient Health. Once again, this is Dr. John McDougall, one of the top medical professionals in the world, in the United States, on helping people to reverse lifestyle diseases. Starts off with him and goes on to other medical professionals. Whoops, forgot to put the audio back up there again. Let me do that one more time, my bad. Sound, I think this is it.
But the main thing that folks should be concerned about is how long you live and how likely you are to get disease. And there have been 3 major studies published on this subject, big meta-analyses. And these meta-analyses, and only 3 big ones have been published, they show consistently that low-carb diets, in other words, low plant food diets, high animal food diets, consistently they show that they're associated with more heart disease and more death, more mortality.
If you look around the world and you look at these people in the blue zones, the average percentage of calories from carbs ranges from about 50% to about 80%. Carbs are not the enemy. Refined carbs are the enemy.
There have been a number of recent studies. Dr. Beeshold out of Phoenix, Arizona, first she did an observational study showing that plant-based diet actually significantly improves your depression and anxiety stress score. It's called a DASS score.
So the mood actually is improved when you get the right amount of carbohydrates, but also the right type of carbohydrates and less protein.
Then she followed up with an interventional study, and that's where she took people who are not on a plant-based diet and put them on a plant-based diet for 2 weeks. She also put them on a plant-based diet plus fish for 2 weeks to see which one would be superior. And it turned out the fish diet wasn't any more superior than the carnivore diet. But the plant-based diet, significant, dramatic changes, statistically significant changes in just 2 weeks in their mental ability.
We see when people go on this diet and drink plenty of water, get plenty of rest, follow these natural remedies, that it's just like something snaps in their brain, and it doesn't take like weeks or months.
Plant-based diet is key in our program for depression and anxiety recovery. The results are outstanding because it's a comprehensive approach. It's not just diet. We also utilize exercise, and we're utilizing correct thoughts and a lot of different modalities. But the diet is a key element.
I went on a plant-based diet about 5 weeks ago.
It's amazing because even if they had not told me he had the diet change, the first thing I noticed was he was bringing his schoolwork in.
And my teacher has actually been bragging on how much better I've been behaving since I've been on the diet.
In class, he wasn't getting as distracted, that he was paying attention. He was able to listen more closely. He was being alert. His discernment was better. He was more diligent, everything.
I can pay attention more. My mind is more clear since I've been on the diet.
It's just a huge improvement. And I also noticed he lost a lot of weight. But the main things I noticed was behavioral.
A study in a middle school has showed clearly that switching the menu from animal source to plant source diet almost eliminated absenteeism, increased and enhanced attention and homework performance and performance at school. It almost eliminated acts of violence as well as teen pregnancies.
And so they just feel better. Everywhere the blood flows, everywhere that perfect circulation goes, they feel better. Not just in body, but in mind. Clears up their thoughts even.
And every single day since I've been on a plant-based diet, the clarity continues to increase and my face continues to look younger, and my body feels like I look more vibrant. I've looked at pictures of myself before and after, and I look 5 years older, even just 10 months ago, than I do now.
What we eat does get turned into neurotransmitters. It actually helps us or hurts us, depending on what we're eating in regards to our brain chemistry. And it plays a vital role in health of the brain.
They'll say within 3 or 4 days, they seem to have clarity. They're alert. They listen in class better. They absorb more, and they do better on their tests.
The fog has been lifted out of my head. I think clearer. I've got better ideas, I believe. I can put 2 and 2 together faster, and just in general, I'm happier.
In fact, diet alone, studies show that diet alone will reduce your depression and anxiety scores by half just by dramatically changing your diet to a plant-based. And so that's significant. Now, we go for more than just half, and so that's why we have a whole program that includes more than this. But just the diet alone will make a big difference.
You don't have to choose between high-quality living and longevity. It's the same program. The same New Start approach to living helps you live longer, and it helps you live better.
That an ancient, or I should say, the first study is replicated today and has the same effects, right? Students in Babylon that tried this found that their cognition improved. And then today we find the same thing. And that one doctor where she was talking about the school that reformed their diet, that was actually a school in Wisconsin that was a reform school. And it was a day school. So they didn't have control of their whole diet. They just fed them breakfast and lunch. And then when they went home, they ate whatever they usually eat. And this was a school for troubled teens that were kicked out of other schools. And yet when they came to this school with the diet reform, they improved. Less violence and absenteeism and all of that. And so true science is replicable, right? That means you can repeat it and have the same results. And so the first study is about what? The gut-brain connection. Isn't that interesting? What those young men were eating affected their minds. And that was the first study. And then today we tried that, and sure enough, it's true. The gut affects the brain. So that just gives you so much confidence in the Word of God, right? That there is true science in it, and we can trust it. And there's more. There, Lamentations 1:20. It says, "Behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled." They saw this connection, right? Between their bowels and their distress. Jeremiah 4:19 says, my bowels, I am pained at my very heart." So they saw this connection as well. And I think Chad mentioned this before, that 90% of the information that travels within the vagus nerve between the gut and the brain is going from the gut to the brain and not the other way around. So 90% of the information. So it makes sense that you're going to feel whatever you're doing in your gut first in your brain, because all the information is traveling that way. And for me, this was a really big breakthrough understanding this, because I grew up in a home with a lot of tension and arguing and things like that. And so then I would just get so discouraged because I just thought there's something wrong with us. You know, what's wrong with my family? Praying all the time, asking for God to help us and not seeing things happen. And so you just get discouraged and think, what's wrong with me, right? But once I realized this, I was like, wow, this is huge. And it just lifted a burden off my shoulders, because I can do something about my gut, right? I can do something to improve it. And then therefore, I start to see improvements in the family. So this is a really interesting thing. It says Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 50. The abuses of the stomach by the gratification of appetite are a fruitful source of most church trials. Isn't that interesting? So we see this connection between the gut and the brain, right? And when you see tension between people, think maybe they're having some gut issues, instead of, why are they being so nasty to me? Right? If we would just think like maybe they're having some issues, it would kind of help us understand, oh, maybe that's the reason and not so much. So scientists have discovered that a high-fat diet leads to depressive, anxious symptoms in mice, and it also promotes inflammation. And inflammation is a marker for depression. So what they did is they put some of the mice on a high-fat diet, and then they put other mice on a regular fat diet. And what they found is that the high-fat mice exhibited behaviors like anxiety, impaired memory, repetitive behaviors, and inflammation. So that's what happened with the mice that had the high fat. And then it didn't exhibit in the regular fat diet mice, except when they took the microbes from the guts of the high-fat mice and they put them into the guts of the regular diet mice. And then the regular diet mice exhibited the same behaviors when they had the same gut bacteria. Isn't that interesting? So the high-fat diet affected the guts of those mice. And then when they took the bacteria from them and put it in the regular fat diet mice, the same behaviors were exhibited. So somehow your gut bacteria is affected by what you eat, right? And so remember we said that gut bacteria like high fiber. And so when you refine a food, they don't like it. The bad gut bacteria like the refined food and they thrive. Another thing is eating too frequently, too much, and of rich, unwholesome food destroys the healthy action of the digestive organs, affects the brain, and perverts the judgment, preventing rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting. So again, the gut brain, too much, too frequently, rich, unwholesome food. It cannot be, this is from Child Guidance, it cannot be too often repeated that whatever is taken into the stomach affects not only the body, but ultimately the mind as well. And listen to this. If you struggle with being impatient and things, it is difficult and often well nigh impossible for one who is intemperate in diet to exercise what? Patience and self-control. If we're intemperate in the way we eat, we may exhibit, behavior that would be impatient and things like that. Well, this is a biblical principle. In 2 Peter 1:5-6, this is like the the step ladder of faith. It says, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and after knowledge comes what? Temperance. And to temperance, what comes after temperance? Patience. So if we're not being temperate, it'll be hard to be patient. Does that make sense? And so temperance, because a lot of times we're impatient and then we just pray and pray and pray for patience, right? And then God's like, but I've given you a principle of temperance. And if you follow that within your sphere, then you'll have more patience, because I know how these bodies are made and how they function best, right? But sometimes we don't realize that connection, and then we grow up fighting and doing all things in our families and in our churches and in our friends' circles, and we get discouraged and depressed, and it just could be that our guts are messed up, right? And to me, that's good news. That's very good news, because you can fix that. By God's grace, you can fix it. So one other thing, so we just want to understand a little bit more about digestion. And what happens is the gut bacteria that is so good for us, they love high fiber foods. They just thrive on it. And they actually live on high fiber foods. So like an apple has about 100 million bacteria in and on it. And so when you eat it, you're getting bacteria, good bacteria in your gut, and you're giving the bacteria the food it needs. And that's like the apple or any kind of fruit, the fiber, right? And when they eat the fiber, because we can't always digest all fibers, right? Our guts aren't made to do that. But the bacteria does. The bacteria will eat that fiber for you and give you a byproduct called short-chain fatty acids. And guess what short-chain fatty acids do for you and me? They decrease inflammation in the body. Isn't that awesome? It decreases inflammation in the body. And so what happens is you then become happier, because inflammation is a marker for depression and other lifestyle diseases. So if you're bringing the inflammation down in your body, you are going to be a happier person. And so that's why it's good to feed the gut bacteria, because if you feed them, they'll make you happy. So if you think of it that way, like, hey, I got to feed my bacteria today. Think about them a little bit. They're actually parasites that are good for you. Actually, we shouldn't call them parasites. They're just in you and they're good for you. They're not harmful. So American Scientific says, think twice. How the gut's second brain influences mood and well-being. It says here, the second brain informs our state of mind in other more obscure ways as well. A big part of our emotions are probably influenced by the nerves in our gut. Like butterflies in the stomach signaling the gut as part of our physiological stress response, Gershon says, is but one example. Although GI turmoil can sour one's moods, everyday emotional well-being may rely on the messages from the brain below to the brain above. And so, again, science is just showing us how much of a connection there is here. But I just want to focus that if there's GI upset, it sours your mood, right? It sours your mood. And it says here in Counsels on Diet and Foods, people who have a sour stomach are very often of a sour disposition. Everything seems to be contrary to them, and they are inclined to be peevish and irritable. If we would have more peace amongst ourselves, we should give more thought than we do to having a peaceful stomach. And you know what the word peevish means? It's an old word we don't really use much anymore, but it means being easily irritated by unimportant things. Has anyone here been peevish before? Yes, we can all admit to being peevish. And so it just shows you when you have a sour stomach, when you have issues going on, you're so easily irritated by unimportant things. And so that's why we say things to each other that we don't really mean to say, right? And it's like, just be easy on yourself and take better care of your stomach, right? Don't beat yourself up. Just try to improve it. And we talked about this, 2/3 of your immune system is found in your gut. And we talked about how important it is to take care of your immune system that way, right? And this is interesting, a surprising link between gut germs and toddlers' tantrums. Wow. So they found that when they tested these children, the more diversity of good gut bacteria that kids had, the more outgoing and social they were, and the happier they were. And the less gut diversity they had, they exhibited behaviors of like being withdrawn, afraid, scared, angry, and tantrums, right? And so after seeing this study, Chad and I, whenever we see like a little 3-year-old come up to us and say, "Hi, my name is so-and-so," we'll look at each other like, wow, that kid's got good gut bacteria. And no joke. And then if you find the opposite, you'll find out that poor child has been having gut issues, and maybe they went through round after round of antibiotics, and they just like killed off their gut flora, didn't know, or something happened to them and they're having these issues. And so just things to think about. So if you want a good ratio of good bacteria in your gut, what should you do? Well, we're going to have Chad come up and tell us.
Well, if you want a good ratio of gut bacteria, what should you do? Here is research, a study. Not working? Let's see. Testing. Maybe I'll use the other one. Testing. Oh, okay, it's working. All right. So, study plant-based diet. It's working? Or use the other one? Okay. Study on the plant-based diet leads to healthier microbiome. The microbiome is the various diversity of microbes in a particular environment, in this case, specifically in your intestines. And so eating many different plants, now this makes perfect sense with what Fadia just told us, right? What we saw looking at the research is that as we eat a diversity, now Fadia mentioned there's 100 million bacteria on an apple or in an apple, and so when you eat that, you get that bacterial diversity. But if you eat a pear, there's different bacteria there. And if you eat a plum and a peach, and you get the idea, each one has its own microbial makeup, some similar, some different. And so as you eat a diversity of plant foods, you're adding to your microbiome, to the bacterial makeup within the gut. That's why diversity is so important. And this is interesting because this idea of this eating many different plants fits perfectly with what the Bible says in Genesis chapter 1:29, where it says, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for food." God gave this in the beginning. And by the way, God gave Adam and Eve this food in a place called the Garden of Eden. And the word Eden in the Hebrew language means pleasure. So it was the garden of pleasure. So you would expect that whatever God gave to Adam and Eve was best created for their happiness and their pleasure. And that is exactly what we see. And we're going to see more of that as we look at the research. This right here is from, it's hard to see, it's a review from the Bulgarian Journal of Plant Physiology. Do you subscribe to that? No, probably not. But the title of this review is Animal Neurotransmitter Substances Are Found in Plants. Animal neurotransmitter substance. It's interesting because typically when we think of neurotransmitters, we think of kind of chemicals for the brain. And they are for the brain. But there's actually other portions of the body that need neurochemicals like our gut. Like serotonin is very important for our gut. And interestingly enough, researchers have found that you can find these neurotransmitters, these brain chemicals, where? In plants. That's what it says, right? And so you can find these in plants. And so as you eat a diversity of plants, you're getting these neurochemicals. Fascinating. Now, thinking about this, Fadia mentioned research on the toddlers, but what about the impact of bacteria on alcoholic men? Let's look at the research. This was a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it revealed an imbalance of gut bacteria in certain alcoholics. They were looking at 60 different alcoholics, and 24 of them had lower levels of bacteria in their gut. So the ones that had lower levels of bacteria, do you think they found it harder to overcome the alcohol or easier to overcome the alcohol? You said harder. Well, let's see what they found. After 19 days alcohol-free, those with lower levels of bacteria had high levels of anxious feeling, depression, and desire for alcohol. Because if you're depressed and anxious, do you think it could be possible that you want something to cover up your anxiety and depression? Yes or no? Sure, you might be like, hey, I could use some alcohol. It'll fix this right up. The trouble is alcohol doesn't fix it right up. It only covers it for a moment. But then once the alcohol is gone, it actually leads you into a life of lower levels of happiness. This is what the research actually shows. So regular, even moderate drinking of alcohol actually lowers your level of happiness in the rest of your life if you keep it up. But the good news is if you cease to drink, and I'm not telling you what you have to do. I used to be a heavy drinker. But when you give it up, actually, your body gets back to a state of homeostasis that is actually healthy and happy once again, but it takes a little while to get there. And so what did they find here in this study, though? They found that the 36 participants with better gut flora, better gut bacteria were doing better. Interesting that having somebody who may not be able to overcome an addiction, it actually may stem from what's going on in their gut. That's interesting. I was sharing this with a friend of ours. I'll tell you that story in just a second. Here's the conversation talking about research on fruit and vegetables may help to combat drug addiction. I was sharing this research with a friend of ours out in California who at that time was struggling with methamphetamine, one of the worst drugs in the world. And he, as he listened to all of this, he said something absolutely fascinating to me. He said, you know, addicts all have one thing in common. And I'm wondering, what is it? And he says, all addicts have a terrible diet. And I thought back on when I was an addict, when I couldn't stop smoking, when I was drinking myself to sleep at night, I had a horrible diet. He was absolutely right about me. And it's true, you don't sit around often and see some addict who's like, man, I could go for a salad. That's not normal, right? But it may actually be because something is disturbed in their gut. They don't have a good, this microbiome, this bacterial diversity. And because of that, they have higher levels of inflammation. That higher rate of inflammation negatively impacts the brain. It impacts the entire body. They don't feel as good. So they don't feel as good. Then when you don't feel good, you have negative thoughts often. And if you have negative thoughts, sometimes people look for something to cover those thoughts. Could be drugs, alcohol, meth, marijuana, whatever it is. Whatever it is. But listen to this interesting idea. It says, in our medical institutions, clear instruction should be given in regard to temperance. The patients should be shown the evil of intoxicating liquor and the blessing of total abstinence. They should be asked to discard the things that have ruined their health, and the place of these things should be supplied with an abundance of fruit. Oranges, lemons, prunes, peaches, and many other varieties can be obtained, for the Lord's world is productive, a painstaking effort is put forth. And this is exactly what we see, that eating more fruits and vegetables can add to that microbiome or the microbiota. And as it does so, it can lower inflammation, makes you start feeling better. As you start feeling better, your thoughts are now better. And because of that, you're not seeking the substance to cover up the problems in your life. And eating a diversity of plant foods can help us to do that. And that's why, like, the University of Queensland tells us that fruit is a depression buster for women, meaning women who consume more fruit have lower levels of depression. And you say, okay, it doesn't work for men. No, it does. It just happened to be a study for women. This is from the Journal of Neuropsychiatry of Clinical Neuroscience. And the title of this entry is Depression and Fruit Treatment. Who would have thought? It's probably kind of hard to see, but I'll just read it to you very quickly. It says, research has shown the involvement of these neurotransmitters that we mentioned, the involvement of serotonin, melatonin, and tryptophan in depression. And then it talks about, it goes on to talk about how depression is a mood disorder affecting sleep, appetite, and libido, and is also one of the manifestations of dementia and may lead to suicide attempts, particularly with violent means. And in the second column, the first full paragraph, it says there are some high content sources of these neurotransmitters, serotonin, melatonin, and tryptophan, which can provide the body with these substances. These include plantains, pineapples, bananas, kiwis, plums, and tomatoes for serotonin. And so now it's interesting. They mention a bunch of like fruit mainly, right? No, plantains are basically like a banana that you kind of have to cook typically. And my wife and I love plantains, by the way. And but as we see these plants, how many of you like fruit? You actually think, yeah, fruit's pretty good, right? It's interesting that that's the one food that almost everybody, there is, 1 in 100 people that like just don't like fruit. But that's very unusual, yes or no? Because humans normally like sweet things. And by the way, somebody might be thinking, that's because fruit's a weight-gaining food. No, it's not. It's actually one of the greatest weight loss foods on planet Earth. When you hear like Discovery Channel, oh, the animals are eating fruit because fruit helps gain much weight. It's like, that is a load of rubbish. You have to eat so much fruit to gain weight, it's almost impossible. It's very, very difficult to do that. So, Discovery Channel, it's more of a philosophy channel sometimes. But nevertheless, that's a side point, because you look at people, and I'm not saying to become a fruitarian, but if you've ever looked at fruitarians on the internet, they are the skinniest people. They're not gaining weight from eating, some of them eat 30 bananas a day. And they are pencil thin. It is impossible to get fat. I mean, like, it's almost literally impossible off fruit, literally. But nevertheless, that's a side point. But the researchers are finding, what if we give these things to patients? And then it says at the end, it seems that using such foods in the daily diet of depressed patients not only could treat the disease, but may improve the prognosis of dementia and decrease violent suicide attempts. Could changing someone's diet change their level of happiness and even potentially reverse depression and cause people not to want to commit suicide? It seems so simple. But we're going to look at more research on happiness in fruit and vegetables, by the way. This is a study from the British Journal of Health Psychology. And the name of the study, they actually named it this: Many Apples a Day Keep the Blues Away. Now, you may be thinking, I got to eat a bunch of apples every day. No. You don't have to eat a bunch of apples every day. It was a play on the old saying, what? An apple a day keeps the doctor away. So they're like, a bunch of apples a day keep the blues away. But they didn't mean that you had to eat a bunch of apples. All they're doing is saying, the more fruits and vegetables you eat in a day, the higher your level of happiness. And then they also found that the more fruits and vegetables you eat today will make you happier today, but it also forecasted how happy you would be the next day. And the study was replicated here in the American Journal of Public Health, and this is the actual chart to give you an idea of how it works. At the bottom left is 0 servings of fruits or vegetables, then it goes on 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 8 servings. And the bottom to top is change in life satisfaction, basically how happy you are. So if you eat 0, you're statistically at your lowest level of happiness. If you eat 1 serving of fruit or vegetable, hardly makes a difference, but a tiny bit. And then as you continue to eat more, it goes up, up, up until you get to 8 servings. And they actually come to the conclusion, they say, that the highest level of happiness is with 7.2 servings of fruit and 8.2 servings of vegetables. Now, you say, Chad, that's a lot of fruits and vegetables. It is. But can you imagine how many good microbes you're going to be adding to your gut if you were to do something like that? You'd be so happy we wouldn't know what to do with you, right? Yeah, these neurochemicals. Neurochemicals. You'd be getting the bacteria. You'd be getting all of these things, and you'd be feeding those bacteria the good fiber that they need. And they actually did this is looking at the best microbiome. The University of California, San Diego reports on the largest human study on the microbiome. And it turns out that people who consume more than 30 different plants per week have the greatest diversity of bacteria in their guts compared to those who ate less than 10 different plants a week. And some of you might be thinking, 30 different plants a week? Who on earth could eat that many plants in a week? It's actually not very hard, and I'll give you an example. So, for instance, sometimes if you go to like the big grocery stores or whatever, they have those boxes of greens, like a salad box, a mixed greens. And my wife and I, we had bought one of those, and it has a list of the veggies. You know, some of them are just spinach or just lettuce or whatever, but other ones are a mixture of a bunch of stuff. And one of them, we were just eating it. We're like, I wonder how many different kinds are in there. And it said right on the box. So we're like, 1, 2, 3. There were 13 different plants in one box. So you got almost half of your month's worth, or half of your week's worth, rather, of plants in one salad. And that's if you didn't add anything to it, right? If you added tomatoes or something, I mean, you add 1 or 2 more things, you're already at half of the weeks in one meal. And I don't actually suggest eating 15 different things at one meal. It's not always the easiest thing to digest a great diversity like that. But the point is, it's not as hard to hit that 30 number as you might think. And this is interesting. For a dyspeptic stomach, now what is that? A dyspeptic stomach is of or having indigestion and consequent irritability or depression. That's the official definition. And so looking at this, for a dyspeptic stomach, you may place upon your tables fruits of different kinds, but not too many at one meal. You don't want to have, 10 different kinds at one meal generally. And it would be well for us to do less cooking and eat more fruit in its natural state. Let us eat freely of fresh grapes, apples, peaches, oranges, blackberries, and all other kinds of fruit which can be obtained. They're phenomenal for us. Well, this is an actual name of a study, and this won't make any sense, so I'll explain it to you. Post-antibiotic gut mucosal microbiome reconstitution is impaired by probiotics and improved by autologous FMT. What is this talking about? Now, it's very common these days that if someone goes and takes some antibiotics, and by the way, what do antibiotics kill? Bacteria. They don't kill viruses, they kill bacteria. Antibiotic, anti-life, basically. And so it's interesting. Many times when people take antibiotics, they say, well, go take some probiotics to help you out, right? Well, they've actually done research to find out, does it work? And this is what they found. They gave people 3 different things. They either gave them, well, one of them isn't giving them anything. They gave them nothing. They changed nothing after taking antibiotics. The second group would take probiotics, which is bacteria in a pill. Generally, a diversity of bacteria in a pill to try to recolonate the bacteria in your gut. And the third group did something called FMT, which stands for fecal microbiome transplant. Fecal standing for what? Feces. Those of you who don't know what that is, poo-poo, right? They would take that, and you could do one of 2 different things. This is how they do it. There's 2 ways to do it. They can either put them in pills and you swallow your feces. The second option is they do an enema and they put it up back the direction it came from. I don't know which one sounds better. They both sound kind of rough, don't they? But nevertheless, those are the 2 options. And what did they find? So what they did was people took the antibiotics, and so it killed off, on average, when you take antibiotics, it kills about 1/3 of the bacteria in your gut. We already found that the wider the distribution or the larger number of bacteria make you more prone to being happy, social, more outgoing, and so forth. Well, what ends up happening is they found that every time we take antibiotics, it raises our chances of having depression by about 25%. And every 2 to 5 times you take it, it raises your chances of depression by about 50%. But that's beside the point. Back to this study. So what they did is they had people try one of these three things. Either you did nothing after antibiotics, you did FMT, or you did the probiotics. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. And what they found was the group that did the absolute best was the one who did the fecal microbiome transplant. Within 2 days, their bacteria was 100% back to normal. And I'm not telling you everybody's going to go into a fecal microbiome transplant. I'm just telling you what the study found. The second group that did the second best were those who did nothing. The group that did the absolute worst were the ones who took these probiotics, these bacteria, in a pill. It took about 6 months to get their gut bacteria to be back to normal. So it seems that overall, I do not recommend taking probiotics in a pill form. Yes. Yes. So, meaning what? Okay, then you might be thinking, Chad, well, if you don't take that after, how do you get your good bacteria back? Take a guess. Eating a diversity of plant foods that have, and then guess what? You don't have to go pay. And some of these companies, they'll sell really expensive ones. You think, man, if it's $400 for these pills, these must be wonderful, right? And the answer is likely no. They're actually probably just more of a scam, or they're maybe not scamming. They may really believe that their product is doing something, but the research just doesn't bear it out. And so I'm here to save you some money and just add to your diet fruits and vegetables. Now, if you already eat that way, just keep doing what you're doing. But if you don't, eat a diversity of fruits and vegetables after you take the antibiotics, and you may find the great benefit of very quickly adding back the bacteria that your gut needs. Now, why do we share all this? The reason we share this is I mentioned the first night that I had gone through about 11 years of depression. What had happened was we were living overseas, and because of the water there, we got stomach trouble, and I had stomach trouble for all those years. Now, I didn't correlate. I didn't recognize, oh, the stomach trouble came and I got depression. It did, but I didn't notice. I didn't even think, oh, maybe they're connected. I just thought, it's just what's going on in my head, repetitive negative thoughts, feeling down. I never felt worthless or not useful. I had a work to do. I was traveling the world, making documentary films. I was sharing things with people about various subjects, biblical subjects, archaeology, history, all kinds of things, and even, helping people overcome addictions and these kind of things. But I was still struggling with depression. I just thought, well, it is what it is, right? And so I tried all different kinds of things. I never tried the medication, but I tried a doctor would say, hey, try this or natural remedy or whatever. I tried all kinds of things, and nothing really worked for me. The good news is I was exercising all the time. I was eating a pretty good diet. And because of that, I think it didn't get as bad as, some people just become, incapacitated. They can't even get out of bed or whatever. Praise the Lord, I didn't have that. And I really feel for those who do. And so I'm not putting them down. But something happened, though. Something happened after years of this. Yes, that's right. And that's right. Thank you for the reminder. Then what happened was about 8 or 9 years into this, I got bit by a tick. And so a doctor friend of mine, he said, hey, we'll give you some antibiotics. So I took the antibiotics. And before that time, it was maybe more of a seasonal depression, like more so in the winter. And after I took the antibiotics, it was full-blown all year round. And I didn't make a connection with it, obviously. I didn't find this out until, later looking into the research on these things. And so I did that 2 years in a row, and 2 years in a row had continual, just chronic depression. I was never diagnosed, but I knew it in myself. I just didn't go to a doctor or anything, but I knew I was depressed. And then I saw this quotation about, similar to a quote I'll show you in just a moment. And when I saw this quotation, I thought, wow, maybe I should try this. And I'll share that with you in just a second. And within 2 weeks, my depression went away after suffering for 11 years. But before I get to that, here's some research on exercise in the gut. I don't even understand this study, but it's fascinating. Multiple studies have revealed, that exercise can increase the diversity and number of health-promoting bacteria in the gut. That's a strange thought. And it may be because people who exercise are more prone to go outside, and you do get better microbial diversity being outside. So maybe it's getting outdoors and you're breathing in air that we think of bacteria as just bad, but it actually may be beneficial. And working in the garden is another thing that can actually help you get a bacterial diversity. We're told exercise aids the dyspeptic stomach by giving the digestive organs a healthy tone. Exactly what the research shows. Very fascinating. Now, I read something similar to this, and this is what changed my life. It says, in many cases of sickness, the very best remedy is for the patient to fast for a meal or two. And let me explain that. That doesn't mean you always, it's basically mean like you fast for a meal or two one time. And so if you're type 1, you probably don't want to do this, but if you're somebody else with a healthy lifestyle, it's not a problem. So basically, let's say you eat 3 meals a day. If you skip 2 meals that day, you will fast for about almost 24 hours. If you eat 2 meals a day and you skip 1 meal, you'll fast for almost 24 hours. So it seems to be saying fast roughly 24 hours if you're relatively healthy. It says, in many cases of sickness, the very best remedy is for the patient to fast for a meal or two that the overworked organs of digestion may have an opportunity to rest. And then it says a fruit diet for a few days, not forever. A fruit diet for a few days has often brought great relief to brain workers. Many times, a short period of entire abstinence from food, followed by simple, moderate eating, has led to recovery through nature's own recuperative effort. An abstemious or a simple diet for a month or two would convince many sufferers that the path of self-denial, is the path to health. Now, I didn't know how long to do it for, so I did it for 2 weeks. And I don't suggest everybody goes and eats just fruit for 2 weeks. You could, if you can handle it, a couple days. And what's going to happen in those couple days? Typically, you're going to start feeling amazing. You're going to start getting additional, bacteria in your gut. You'll probably start having clarity of mind like you may not have had for years. You typically, within about 3 to 4 days of changing the diet, you start having energy increase. It's really incredible. But what's that? Yeah, and also my inflammation. I had achy joints, and I was 35 at the time, and I had quit running because of that. But it took away all the joint pain, and I was able to start running again faster than I could when I was 16 or 19 years old without even practicing. It was incredible. It just changed my life. It's one of the best experiences that ever happened to me. So just to kind of rehash what this says, so I call this how to balance the gut. So number one, a temporary fast, just one time, not all the time, just one time. And a short one, maybe, roughly a 24-hour period if you're not a type 1 or on some serious drug medication. And then it says to go on a fruit diet temporarily, like a few days. Some people say, well, watch out, Chad, because fruit's bad for diabetics. Well, that's not actually what the research shows. And this is fruit consumption, although sometimes people with melons, like cantaloupe, for about half of people that eat cantaloupe, it can increase their chances of diabetes. But strawberries, anything under that black line is lowering your risk. Strawberries generally lower it. Oranges lower it more. Peaches, plums, apricots more. Grapefruit more. Bananas more. Apples and pears more. Prunes. It's interesting that prunes lower your risk of diabetes more than plums, which are the 4th one in. It's interesting. So prunes, and actually dried fruit is generally, strangely enough, quite good for diabetics. They've even tested in non-diabetics and diabetics dates. And what they found, in neither group did it cause significant blood sugar spike because they're high in fiber, and that fiber is a lattice. The sugar's in a lattice of fiber, and because of that, they slowly release the glucose into the body. And so grapes and raisins are equally good, and blueberries are just phenomenal. And but total fruit intake lowers significantly your chances of type 2 diabetes. This is a study of over 100,000 people in the British Medical Journal. So don't worry so much. Now, if you notice that one food or another, if you're a type 2 diabetic or a type 1 for that matter, sometimes you'll find one food really spikes your blood sugar. And it can be different for different diabetics. Like I know of one, typically they say, diabetics will do better with sweet potatoes than regular potatoes. But I know of one type 1 diabetic, he does better with white potatoes than sweet potatoes. So you have to figure it out for yourself a bit. You got to do some testing. But so how to balance your gut? Fasting temporarily, one time. Then maybe a temporary fruit diet for a few days. Then eat more whole grains. Now that could be whole wheat if you don't have either celiac disease or a sensitivity to gluten. Now, the top researcher in the world on gluten is a man by the name of Alessio Fasano. And he says that about 1% of the population has celiac disease, that is an autoimmune reaction to wheat. And there's about gluten rather. And there's about 5% of people that have some kind of allergy or allergic reaction either to something in wheat or gluten. So you add that up, and that's about 6% of people struggle with wheat. So if you're one of those 6% of people, it's better just to avoid it. But if you're, the 90+% otherwise, my wife actually does struggle with it. We tried with it, without it, with it, without it, and we clearly see a difference for her. I do phenomenal with bread. And so once again, we've got to work with our own bodies. We're not telling you you have to do anything, but you want to work with your own body. And if you're one that can't eat wheat, the good news is there's other whole grains that you might do just fine with. You could have gluten-free oatmeal, or you could have teff or millet or amaranth. There's all kinds of other quinoa, gluten-free grains or pseudo grains. But the key is with grains to eat them well cooked. Well cooked. Many times people are trying to eat grains raw. You can eat like wheat right on the plant when it's still green. It is edible at raw like that. But once it turns hard, and once oats and these kind of things are hard, some people can digest oats raw, but that's not easy on the intestines. It's actually better to eat them well cooked. It breaks down the starches, and so that it makes it more digestible. So if you're going to eat grains, I would suggest not doing the raw grain thing. If you can handle it, more power to you, but most people don't do well with that. So also eat more whole vegetables. And when I say whole, that doesn't mean they have to be raw. It just means non-refined. That's what we're talking about. Like most of the sugar in the United States comes from, anybody know? Beet. The sugar beet. From the sugar beet. And so what I'm saying is when I say whole, I mean, eat a sweet potato, don't suck sugar out of a sweet potato. So that's what I'm saying by whole. I don't mean to eat a raw sweet potato either. I don't eat raw sweet potatoes. We eat them cooked, right? And so my point is when I say whole, we're not talking about they have to be raw. You can eat some raw veggies too. And then one of the things I would suggest doing also is to eat you only need a handful of nuts a day to get the full, sorry, I'm not trying to show a picture of my wife and I here, but only one handful of nuts a day to get all the cognitive benefit you need. If you need to lose weight, if you do, any more than one handful can make it harder to lose weight. And so just very calorie dense there. And also, if you go fully plant-based, I would suggest eating adding maybe some B12 to your diet. And by the way, it's actually suggested, medical professionals suggest that everybody over the age of 50 should be taking a B12 supplement. Whether you're a meat eater, a plant-based eater, my grandfather, he ate meat his entire life, and he was B12 deficient. So he had to take injections of B12. After the age of 50, our body starts struggling more to uptake the B12 that we consume. So it's actually suggested, like I said, if you're 50 or older, pretty much everybody should take it. But if you're on a plant-based diet, you can get B12 from plant sources. I'm not going to go into the research. I could show you the research, but most of us aren't going to find it in plant. There's plants like, there's something called duckweed. It's common in Asian countries like Korea, and you can get all the B12 you need from duckweed. They've done research on this. It's just that most of us probably don't eat duckweed, and so you can get it from plants, but it's not something all of us are doing, so taking a supplement is a wise thing to do. Well, I want to close with this. This is one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard. This is a true story of the Victor Valley Medium Community Correctional Facility in Adelanto, California. And this is what they did was there was a multimillionaire Adventist man who wanted to start a prison that was a correctional facility that actually was a correctional facility. Because are prisons normally correctional facility? Like, do people come in and when they come out, they're corrected? They're like good citizens when they come out, right? Most of the time, that's not the case. Actually, I just met a man here who, just told us here in town, he runs a barber shop, actually trains barbers, and he started businesses after getting out of prison. So some people are, God changes their life in prison. I don't mean that nobody is, but statistically, it's not great. Well, here's the thing. So this guy he was a multimillionaire Adventist businessman. And so he got a contract with what's called the CDC, but not the one you're thinking of. It's the California Department of Corrections. And they gave him a contract for a 500 inmate prison. And so he said, we're going to do something different in our prison. We're going to separate it. There's going to be two physical sides to the prison. And the prisoners will get to decide what side they go into. One of the sides, we're going to allow them to choose if they want to go on the side that has a New Start program of a total plant-based diet, occupational training, Bible studies, and anger management classes. Okay, that's interesting. So they give the guys, and one of the government officials heard that they were saying, listen, we're going to give them the choice whether to go plant-based or eat meat. And one of the government officials said, no way. No way. These guys would rather burn the place to the ground than go vegan. Okay, so they gave them the choice. And guess what percentage of these men chose of their own volition to become total plant-based? It was 85% of them chose to go vegan. I could just imagine them. They're like, yeah, I'm vegan. Like, all right, bro. You do whatever you want, man. I'm not looking down on you. You can eat whatever you want. I don't care. So now what ended up happening? Now there's a statistical measure called recidivism. And recidivism, if you've been to prison once, let's say there's 100 people, and they go to prison, and then they get out, and then 70% of them commit a crime again, and they go back to prison. That's a 70% recidivism rate. Does that make sense? Simple. Well, at that time in the state of California, the recidivism rate was 95%. Can you imagine? Yeah, California, somebody said. That's why so many people have been moving out of California and moving to Tennessee, right? People want to live where they actually, criminals go to prison now or whatever, instead of like just leaving people out. But whatever, that's beside the point. I'm not trying to get political, but you get the idea. And so what ends up happening? While this man, his name is Terry Moreland, was running this prison, the recidivism rate from this prison dropped from the California average of 95% all the way down to 2%. Now, the average in the U.S. is 51.8%, but this was almost a complete reversal. Would you at that point call that place a correctional facility? Yes, you would. And what happened was prisoners around the state of California, they actually had to have a waiting just to get into the one side because everybody wanted to get in there. When they heard I was changing their lives, and then the guys in that side were changing their family members' lives on the outside. They're like, man, when you eat better, your life is so much better. It's amazing. And so as their lives were being changed, they were changing other people's lives. And then other prisoners in other prisons were saying, can I go into that Victor Valley Medium Community Correction Facility in Adelanto, California? It's the longest name they could have ever thought of for a prison. But nevertheless, so they wanted to go over there. And you know what? So other prisons were interested. They were learning what was going on. And so you know what they did with this prison? They shut it down. I interviewed one of the men who helped start this place. His name is Richard Bland. This man actually had marched with Martin Luther King Jr. He showed me a picture. He's like, here's Martin Luther King Jr. That's me right there. He said everybody else in this picture is dead. But Richard Bland, number one, wasn't murdered. And number two, he ate a very healthy diet. So he's lived a nice, long life. I think he's still alive today. And what ended up happening, we were told that they shut it down. Well, the idea seems to be because prisons are big business. And when you have business, and I'm not against business, actually, I'm not, but this kind, and I'm not against private prisons because this was a private prison. It was the best prison in American history. And it was private. So I'm not against privatizing certain things like that either. But the point is, sadly, they shut it down because one of the things about prison, if it's a big business, is one of the best ways to get people to come back. Well, one of the best ways to make money, rather, is to have repeat customers, right? And what if 90% of prisoners never had to go back to prison? Man, there'd be a lot of money lost in the prison system. But the entire nation would be better off. Yes or no? Yes. Yeah. So why did they shut them down? After 7 years, they shut them down. And their excuse was they said, oh, you're taking money from the collect calls somehow, and that's corruption. Well, here's the thing. You know what he was doing with the money he was making? He had so much money, he didn't care about the money. He was using the money they were making off this prison because he could run it cheaper than standard government-run prisons. He could run it cheaper. And you know what they did with the money they were making? They were helping the guys get housing when they got out of prison. That's what they were doing with the money. So it wasn't some kind of corruption like, oh, we want pennies from phone calls. They didn't care about pennies from phone calls. But they were using the money that they were getting to not only change their life in there, but to help them when they got out of prison. Sadly, it shut down, which is a travesty, really. And it's also a travesty that you've never heard this story. This should be on 60 Minutes. This should be on all over the news, right? But nobody knows about this stuff because obviously a lot of true news never makes it to the mass media. We have to find information off in other sources. But nevertheless, who would have ever guessed? Who would have ever guessed that changing the diet of these people could potentially change them from a life of criminality to being truly good citizens? And notice what we are told here. Wrong habits of eating and the use of unhealthful food are in no small degree responsible for the intemperance and crime and wretchedness that curse the world. This is true. Friends, it is when I changed from this, for the first time when I changed to this lifestyle, and I'm the least likely person to be upfront teaching you about this. My favorite food was pork ribs. They're tasty, by the way. And I'm the least likely person to be up front telling you this, but it changed my life. I feel better in my 40s than I did when I was 16 or 18 years old. It's unbelievable what it does to people. And I share this with you because it changed my life. It took me from a life of depression to happiness, got rid of my migraines, got rid of my achy joints. It got rid of my hypoglycemia, depression, my bowel problem. I mean, I could just go on. It sounds like a bad infomercial how many things this helped. But it's true. It's true. And I actually had a gallbladder issue. My grandfather died of a gallbladder surgery. Grandma had gallbladder surgery. My aunt had gallbladder surgery. And here I was struggling with gallbladder pain. And when I had a doctor who told me what to do, go on this diet. And it wasn't some tricky little fast thing. It was literally changing my diet. And within 3 days, all the gallbladder pain went away. And both Dr. Zane Keim and a doctor by the name of our friend Hans Deal, they both share that they had patients who went on the same diet, whole food, plant-based diet, and reversed gallstones, literally reversed gallstones. And so it can happen. It happened in my life. Now, I want to show you a couple short clips before we go. Natural remedies are either loved or laughed at. Conventional medication is trusted by most almost implicitly, but it turns out that different antibiotics, which are considered the greatest form of drug in history, are associated with 41% increased rates of Parkinson's disease, 40% increased risk of gastric cancer, 40% greater risk of lung cancer, 60% higher risk of rheumatoid arthritis, 23 to 56% greater risk of depression, and they are also associated with a higher risk of our number one killer, heart disease. Are there other options? In this lecture series, we will look at many natural remedies, including herbs that have been tested head-to-head in scientific journals against some of the standard pharmaceutical medications. And we will discover that many natural remedies have been shown in evidence-based research to be just as good or better than many standard medications, in many cases with significantly lower side effects. We begin the series looking at some of the history of natural remedies from Egypt through Rome, all the way down to Native Americans. Session 2 delves into how to live a healthy life so that on the whole you do not have to use remedies. Then from session 3, 4, 5, and 6, we delve into study after study and find remedies for maladies ranging from migraines to PMS symptoms, how to change lifestyle to potentially reverse ED, and cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood sugar lowering remedies, a remedy for irritable bowel syndrome, in addition to remedies for depression and anxiety. We will look at a simple herb that helps as a sleep aid and many more. So come along on a tour of history and research and learn more at anchorpointfilms.com. According to an article in the National Institute of Health, the book of Daniel in the Bible reveals the first clinical trial in all of recorded history. What is interesting about this clinical trial, which was conducted 2,500 years ago, is that it is a study of the gut-brain connection. Inspiration revealed long before modern science the staggering fact that that which affects the gut will ultimately affect the brain as well. Is it possible that the majority of mental problems may actually stem from the gut? Is it possible to overcome depression, anxiety, bouts of anger, and social anxiety by changing the way you eat? One of the greatest reasons people are not able to find victory in the area of overeating and eating unhealthy food is because they are taken captive by the negative aspects of the gut-brain connection. Instead of being captive to these negative aspects, you can actually use it to your advantage to help you overcome in various areas of your life. In every gut, there are good bacteria and bad bacteria. If you have too many bad bacteria, it can tip the scales into inflammation, joint pain, and even depression. If you have more good bacteria, it can benefit your happiness. How do you increase the good bacteria? Are there certain quantities of good food proven to increase a sense of well-being? In this seminar, you will learn what foods can be eaten that make you comfortably full and yet still lose excess pounds, all the while feeling great. You will also learn additional information on the diet of the longest living people in the world. In this seminar by Chad and Fadia Kreuzer, you will see how cutting-edge science proves what was given long ago by inspiration and how your life can be changed through this biblical approach.
I've been diagnosed as a diabetic for a little over 20 years. And because of my family background, all four grandparents were diabetic. Mom and dad were diabetic. My brother, who passed away a few years ago of diabetic complications, is diabetic. And so with that history, I would be extreme chance for being dead by the age of 40. My side effects were mostly neuropathies. The neuropathy is a feeling you get. It's comes from within the nerve system, deteriorating due to the blood sugar situation. And mine was numbness in my feet. My feet, half of both feet were always numb, and sometimes even back as far as my heel coming up toward my ankle on some days, but always half a foot. At night, periodically, the rubbing of my feet on the sheets would feel like they were being rubbed on a red hot iron, just like they were being blistered. I'd have to put my feet out from under the covers and over the edge of the bed so they weren't touching anything. But the numbness never went away, day or night. I started this therapeutic diet idea before I knew it was therapeutic diet, about a week or maybe two before I met Chad and was introduced to the therapeutic diet concept. I had started adding more fruit, fresh fruit, and more fresh vegetables to an already vegetarian diet. But I was lacto-ovo. That's milk and eggs and cheese vegetarian. We went to the gut-brain, brain-gut connection and got a hold of the recipe book and started some real changes. And within 3 days, the numbness was progressing out of my feet. Within a week, I was down to where I just had 2 toes on each foot that were numb 24/7. And then a few more days, that went to where I could have feeling on the tops of all my feet, all my toes, all my foot. Another day went by, it was down to 1 toe next to the big one. The second toe on both feet were the only numbs. Then that went down to where it was down to just 1 toe. And now the numbness has gone out of all toes and feet. I have a little bit of residual, kind of a fluffy, fuzzy feeling in the left second toe. But basically, I could say it's 99.9% gone. So that's gone. The other thing that I noticed that showed up, I didn't even think about it at the time, But I had been unable to work more than 5-10 minutes out in the yard, and then I'd have to come in and rest for half an hour. And the other day, I was out pruning shrubs and carrying the debris out of the yard and putting it into the pickup. And I was out there for a little over 3 hours, and I came in feeling better than when I went out. So the energy factor is something that kind of surprised me. I didn't expect. So, you know. So it's been an amazing 2.5, 3 week trip. If it keeps like this, look out, boy. Yeah, the world's going to know I'm here. Oh.
Wendell came to the seminar. I mean, this was 2.5 weeks after we started. He said he was 99% of his neuropathy in his feet going away. He was type 2 diabetic. He came to the meetings with a cane, and he was walking slow, looked totally depressed. He told us he had been depressed. His depression was gone in days. His neuropathy, 99% gone. He was walking now without a cane with pep in his step. I mean, it's like a miracle to see these things happen. And what he had is actually normal for type 2 diabetics with neuropathy. 90% of them will have near complete relief within just over 3 weeks. That is literally normal if they stick with the therapeutic diet. And that's what he did. And so if you have any interest, this book, I don't know of any cookbook that's quite like this. It has 2 different kinds of recipes. A bunch of them have a letter T in front of them. It explains it in the beginning of it. There's tons of recipes, even though it's a thin cookbook. It's a ridiculous amount of them. And some of them have a T in front of them, which stands for therapeutic. So if you're looking to hopefully reverse type 2 diabetes, you have about a 95% chance of doing that. If you're looking to reverse or arrest heart disease, the therapeutic diet is the only diet, not just plant-based diet, but the therapeutic diet is the only diet that's been shown to be able to reverse or arrest heart disease. So if you have any interest, and if you get too thin, by the way, because some people get too thin on the therapeutic diet, there's plenty of other non-therapeutic diet recipes that are super healthy in here. So if you need to put on a pound or 2, you can eat the other ones instead of the therapeutic ones. But I'm one of the ones who can get too skinny. But also, if you have any interest, I know you just went through a diabetes seminar. If you have any interest, we have a whole series that we do on overcoming diabetes. Like he said, there's a longer series on the gut-brain connection. And we have a seminar on overcoming bad habits, any kind of bad habit you may struggle with. We have a seminar called Transform Brain and Transform Life, and a seminar called The Science of Herbs and Natural Remedies. You saw a video clip on that. So if you have any interest, this is going to be one of the best times. You can maybe come and get it right before the meeting tomorrow night, but we won't have it after the meeting tomorrow night. So if you have any interest, check it out. But before we go, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your healing power, that even the research began in the Bible. And we see that it's still changing lives today, just as it did 2,500 years ago with Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Lord, thank you that you care for us. You care about not only our spiritual lives, but you care for our physical lives too. Maybe there's somebody struggling with some of the things like Dell there was in the video and thinking, they have no hope, just medication to cover the pain. But we realize in most cases, 90% of people can have complete relief. That you've given simple remedies that can change our lives. We thank you for your love. Bless each one with safe travels as they go home. In Jesus' name, amen. Just reminder, tomorrow night is going to be a health food that may make you depressed, angry, or ruin your marriage. So you don't want to miss tomorrow night. So invite a friend.
And if you want to hear something different, Saturday night, 6:30, we'll have Chad and Fadia talking about, Chad talking about creation versus evolution. Another different topic there. So have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow night.